Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Unbound, Season 3, The Other Side of Quiet. This is our last episode. It's crazy. This epilogue is a reflection on what comes after surviving trauma and navigating loss and confronting fear. It's about the piece that kind of comes out, not from the absence of chaos, but from choice or the freedom to live authentically, to set boundaries and claim your voice and your life and all of that stuff. So here I share how love and family and friendship and self-compassion became the foundation for the calm, resilient life I now live happily. It's Epilogue, the piece that comes after. Peace, I've learned, isn't the absence of chaos. It's the presence of choice. It's waking up every morning and taking time for myself, first thing, before the world has a chance to make demands on my energy. It's putting my bare feet on the ground outside and looking up at the sky and feeling grateful that I can. Grateful for breath, for movement, for the simple freedom to exist in my own body without fear. Peace is knowing that when panic tries to take hold of me, I have a partner who is my calm. Brian doesn't have to say anything or do anything special. His presence alone settles something in my nervous system that reminds me I'm safe. After so many relationships that felt like work, a love that came with conditions and complications, there's something miraculous about having a person who is simply, effortlessly safety. This tells me he's home. This tells me I chose well. Peace is having a unique and special relationship with Nate that has deepened and strengthened through every test life has thrown at us. We're better than ever now, more than we've ever been. Because we've learned to see our relationship through a different lens. Not as something that should have been, but as something that is exactly what it needs to be. Our roots will always be tangled, Nate says, and that couldn't be more true. We've grown together in ways that don't fit neat categories, in ways that have survived decades and distance, and the opinions of people who don't understand why we've chosen to keep each other in our lives, or why we've allowed things to evolve to where they are today. But the people who matter most understand, and the people who don't understand don't matter. Peace is loving my son Cruz so fiercely that I sometimes overwhelm him with my protectiveness, while also knowing that despite all my anxious mothering, he sees nothing but love and support from me. He knows how important he is, how perfect he is to me, how I will stop at nothing to help him have the best life possible. I parent from a place of having been hurt, which means I'm hypervigilant about threats that may never come. But I also parent from a place of having healed, which means I can show him what resilience looks like, what recovery looks like, what it means to turn your pain into purpose. Most of all, peace is the immense freedom that comes from not giving a shit what people think about me anymore. I have 4 of the best friends a girl could want. I have a supportive partner and an entertaining son and family members who like me for exactly who I am. Nobody else matters. That's not cynicism. That's wisdom. Here's what I understand now about the pandemic and why it became my crucible. When the world went quiet, I thought it was punishment. Another round of isolation, another period of being trapped and silenced, another reminder that speaking up leads to being shut down. Feeling like I was being imprisoned yet again for another crime I did not commit. But isolation, it turned out, was exactly what I needed. For the first time in my adult life, I was forced to sit with myself without distraction. No social obligations to perform at, no public spaces where I had to wear masks that triggered my trauma, no constant noise of other people's opinions drowning out my own thoughts. Just me, in the quiet, with nowhere to run from the truth I'd been avoiding for decades. The pandemic didn't create my trauma, but it did something even more valuable. It created the conditions where I had to face it. When I was forced to choose between triggering my PTSD with a mask or isolating at home, I chose isolation. When I was attacked for that choice, when I was called selfish and dangerous and worse, I had to decide, would I explain myself to people who'd already decided I was the enemy, or would I use that energy to heal? I chose healing. The forced quiet of the pandemic became the space where I finally learned the difference between being silenced and choosing silence. I'd spent my whole life having quiet imposed on me by predators who threatened me, by systems that didn't want to hear my questions, by people who preferred me small and grateful and compliant. But during those 2 years of isolation, I chose quiet. I chose to step away from the noise, the judgment, the pressure to defend my existence to people who'd already made up their minds about who I was. And in that chosen quiet, I found something I'd never found in imposed silence: peace. I found the space to grieve properly, to rage safely, and to heal without an audience. I found the freedom to explore alternative therapies, to reconnect with my body, to remember who I was underneath all the survival strategies. The pandemic forced me to confront the question I'd been avoiding my whole life. Who am I when I'm not performing for other people's comfort? The answer surprised me. I was someone who valued truth over popularity, someone who would rather be authentic and alone than fake and surrounded, someone who had survived the worst things that could happen to a person and had somehow impossibly found her way to joy. I was someone with a story worth telling and a voice worth using, even when, especially when, people didn't want to hear what I had to say. The isolation that was meant to break me actually freed me. It freed me from the illusion that I needed everyone's approval to live authentically. It freed me from the belief that other people's comfort was more important than my own truth. It freed me from the exhausting work of trying to make myself acceptable to people who were never going to accept me anyway. When the world reopened and I emerged from those 2 years of chosen solitude, I was not the same person who'd gone into hiding. I was someone who'd learned that her voice was worth protecting, that her peace was worth preserving, that her story was worth telling. The pandemic taught me that sometimes the world has to go quiet for you to hear your own voice. Sometimes you have to be forced into stillness to remember who you are underneath all the noise. Sometimes isolation is not punishment, but preparation. Preparation for the authentic life that's waiting on the other side of all that performing. The girl who was told to be quiet grew up to be a woman who chose when to speak and when to be silent. The trauma that tried to steal her voice became the foundation for a voice that could not be stolen, only shared. And that voice, the one I found in the forced quiet of a global pandemic, the one I strengthened through 2 years of chosen isolation, the one I'm using to tell this story, that voice is finally fully mine. Here's what I know now about living authentically after trauma. Authenticity isn't about being the same person in every situation. It's about choosing how you show up instead of letting fear decide for you. I observe more in social situations now. I listen and I watch and I contribute when I feel compelled to, not when I feel obligated to. I don't let people keep me quiet, but I also choose quiet until I choose not to be quiet. Having that control over my voice preserves my peace. There's a difference between being silenced and choosing silence. There's a difference between being invisible because you're scared and being selective because you're wise. I've learned to trust my instincts about people in ways I never could before. The pandemic changed how I look at people, how I learn to trust people. I'm very cautious about letting people in now, and those boundaries aren't walls, they're filters. I let in the people who can love complexity, who don't need me to be simple or easy or convenient. I let in the people who celebrate my growth instead of mourning my compliance. I let in the people who understand that healing doesn't mean becoming someone who's never been hurt. It means becoming someone who can be hurt without being destroyed. This is what peace looks like after trauma. It looks like small circles that don't overlap or combine, where everyone knows exactly who you are and loves you because of it, not in spite of it. It looks like mornings spent in gratitude instead of anxiety, feet on the ground instead of head in the clouds of worry. It looks like a partner who calms your nerves and your nervous system just by existing, who sees your triggered responses as information rather than inconvenience. It looks like friendships that have roots so tangled they can weather any storm, that are based on who you've become rather than who you used to be. It looks like parenting from both your wounds and your wisdom, protecting fiercely while also modeling resilience. It looks like choosing your battles, choosing your words, choosing your energy investments based on your values rather than other people's expectations. Most importantly, it looks like understanding that you don't owe anyone your story, your compliance, your performance of normalcy, or your shrinking to make them comfortable. You owe yourself authenticity. You owe yourself peace. You owe yourself the life you fought so hard to build. Here's what I want you to know about finding your voice after it's been taken from you. Your voice doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. It doesn't have to please everyone to be valid. It doesn't have to be perfect to be worth hearing. Your voice is worth using even when people don't want to hear what you have to say, especially then. But you also get to choose when to use it. You get to choose silence when silence serves you, and speech when speech serves you. You get to choose who deserves to hear your truth and who has proven they can't handle it. Finding your authentic voice isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you've always been underneath all the adaptations and performances and survival strategies. It's about peeling back the layers of who you thought you had to be loved, and discovering who you actually are when no one is demanding anything from you. It's about learning the difference between changing for growth and changing for approval, between adapting to situations and betraying your own values, between being flexible and being spineless. Your authentic voice will cost you some relationships. Let it. The people who can only love you when you're smaller, quieter, and more convenient aren't your people. The people who feel threatened by your growth or who prefer you wounded and grateful, who need you to stay broken so they can feel whole, they were never really loving you anyway. They were loving their version of you, the version that made them feel better about themselves. Your real people will celebrate your healing. They will encourage your growth, and they will love you bigger as you become bigger, not smaller. Your real people will understand that healing isn't linear, and that growth isn't pretty, and that authenticity isn't always comfortable. They'll stick around through your awkward phases, your boundary setting phases, your learning to say no phases. They'll be patient with your triggers while also expecting you to take responsibility for your healing. They'll see your trauma as something that happened to you, not as something that defines you. They'll see your scars as evidence of your strength, not proof of your brokenness. They'll love you not in spite of your story, but including your story as part of the whole complex, beautiful person you are. And here's what I want you to know about healing. Healing doesn't mean you'll never be triggered again. It means you'll know what to do when you are. Healing doesn't mean you'll forget what happened to you. It means you'll remember it differently, as something that happened to you rather than something that is you. Healing doesn't mean you'll trust everyone again. It means you'll learn to trust your instincts about who is and isn't safe. Healing doesn't mean you'll never feel pain again. It means you'll know the difference between pain that's informing you and pain that's destroying you. Healing means building a life that's bigger than your trauma, richer than your pain, and more meaningful than your survival. It means waking up grateful instead of anxious, connected instead of isolated, and purposeful instead of just getting by. It means understanding that what happened to you was never your fault, but healing from it is your responsibility. Not because you owe it to anyone else, but because you deserve to live fully. It means knowing that your story doesn't end with what was done to you. It ends with what you choose to do with what was done to you. You get to choose whether your story is defined by what happened to you or by what you choose to do with what happened to you. You get to choose whether your trauma becomes a prison or a pathway, or an ending or a beginning, or a reason to give up or a reason to fight harder. You get to choose whether the people who hurt you get to write the conclusion of your story or whether you take the pen back and write it yourself. Here's what I want you to know about hope. Hope isn't naive. Hope is revolutionary. Hope is looking at all the evidence that the world is dangerous and choosing to believe that love is still possible. Hope is acknowledging that people can be cruel and selfish and disappointing and still believing that some people are kind and generous and worthy of your trust. Hope is accepting that bad things happen to good people for no reason and still believing that good things can grow from bad soil. Hope is not about believing everything will be okay. Hope is about believing you'll be okay, regardless of what happens. Hope is understanding that you've already survived the worst things that have happened to you, which means you have the strength to survive whatever comes next. Hope is knowing that even if you can't control what happens to you, you can control what you do with what happens to you. Hope is choosing to plant flowers in the crater where your old life used to be, not because you've forgotten about the explosion, but because you've decided that beauty can grow anywhere if you're willing to tend it. If you're reading this book because you see yourself in my story, if you recognize your own trauma in these pages, and if you're wondering whether healing is possible for someone like you, please know that it is possible. Not easy, not quick, not linear, but possible. You are not too broken to be healed. You are not too damaged to be loved. You are not too much for the right people to handle. You are not responsible for what happened to you, but you are powerful enough to change what happens next. Your voice matters, your story matters, and your healing matters. Not just for you, but for everyone whose story you'll give permission to tell by telling yours. Not just for now, but for the future you're brave enough to build on top of what tried to destroy you. The other side of quiet isn't empty. It's full of love and peace and truth and the kind of freedom that can only come from learning to live as who you actually are instead of who everyone else needs you to be. The other side of quiet is waiting for you. All you have to do is choose to stop being silent about your own life. All you have to do is choose your peace over their comfort, your truth over their convenience, and your healing over their need for you to stay broken. All you have to do is choose yourself and keep choosing yourself every day until choosing yourself becomes as natural as breathing. You deserve the peace that comes after the storm. You deserve the love that comes after the healing. You deserve the life that comes after you stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. You deserve all of it, and it's waiting for you on the other side of quiet. This morning, writing from the top deck of my oceanfront home in Hermosa Beach, California, a place I'm so grateful to be right now, I find myself reflecting on my day. Very early this morning, I put my bare feet in the surf and looked up at the sky and felt grateful. I watched the dolphins playing and felt connected to something larger than my own story. I also felt hope for everyone still searching for their way to the surface. I felt grateful for breath, for choice, for the family I've built and the friends I've chosen, who have stayed through thick and thin, never letting others they know drag me. That's true friendship, honest friendship, soul friendship. Grateful for the voice I've found. Grateful for Nate, whose roots will always be tangled with mine. Grateful for Brian, who is my calm in every storm. Grateful for Crew, who is my purpose and my joy and my reason to keep choosing healing every day. Grateful for the woman I've become. Not perfect, not without scars, not without triggers, but free. Free to speak or not speak, to engage or not engage, to love or not love, based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. Free to live authentically, even when authenticity is uncomfortable. Free to take up space in the world without apologizing for it. Free to be all of who I am. The girl who was hurt, the woman who healed, the mother who protects, the friend who loves, the voice that speaks truth even when truth is unwelcome. This is what the other side of quiet looks like. This is what peace feels like. This is what happens when you choose to save yourself. Thank you for reading my story. Now go write yours. Okay, so I contemplated whether or not I wanted to do a little discussion to wrap things up here, and I realized I needed to because this is the last episode. I can't just leave y'all with nothing. So to start, the print copy of this book is available as of the date of this podcast airing directly through me for purchase. I managed to get my hands on a few more copies. I don't know if anyone wants it. It is a limited print run, and I only have a few more. So the info will be in the show notes. I know some people want the book to hold it because I will sign it for you if you want. There's a personal limited edition seal. You know, it's fancy. Shipping costs aren't included in this, but local pickup or delivery is available. And I am happy to ship, but it's on your dime, kids. And these days, wow, that's crazy. Anyway, in the printed book, and in the This Morning section of the reading that I just did, I have a photo of me the day that I finished the manuscript. And I will share that to the Unbound group on Facebook as well for anyone interested. I did share it on my Facebook page the day it happened because I wrote about it, that I finished the manuscript when I was in Hermosa Beach. And it was actually my 50th birthday. This epilogue, though, it's a meditation on peace and choice rather than circumstance, right? You know, too often we kind of think peace means avoiding chaos and trauma or discomfort, you know, that kind of stuff. But real peace comes from conscious decisions, right? Choosing your own priorities and choosing the people who matter and choosing when to speak and when to step back. And that's kind of what transforms that survival into thriving, right? Um, it is the transition from being a passenger in your own life to being, I guess, the architect of your whole entire environment, right? Um, so yeah, one of the key themes here is authenticity after trauma. Trauma can distort your voice and your perception of yourself. It can really fuck up your relationships. Through isolation and reflection and intentional choices, I learned to distinguish between imposed silence and chosen quiet, as I said. I discovered the value of showing up as myself, not as someone shaped by fear, expectation, or even the desire to please others. Right? This epilogue is about the liberation that comes from reclaiming your life, even after years of being silenced. It explores the masking that we do to survive and the sheer relief that comes when you finally realize you no longer need those defenses to be safe, right? Another major thread is the healing within relationships. Like I've said, I think it was the last episode, Brian represents calm and safety, and Nate represents enduring connection, and Crew represents purpose and joy. These relationships illustrate how healing isn't just personal, it's relational. These are my boys. They're my whole world. True peace is nurtured by people who love you fully and completely and understand your complexity and support your growth without trying to shrink or control you. Like, enough with the controlling and enough with the shrinking. I wanted to highlight these three specifically because they represent different pillars of a functional support system, right? The partner and the history and the future. I am completely at peace with letting go of people who didn't share the same values about life, love, and friendship as I do. I'm grateful to have let go of people from my past and the need for gossip and mean girl behavior I was once a part of because I was desperate for friendships that held me back and allowed me to stay small, And there is kind of a quiet grief in watching someone you once believed would be in your life forever choose the comfort of old relationships and old wounds over actual growth, choosing the grudges and stories and the endless rehearsal of pain. But there is a deep relief in knowing that I could walk away with my heart open, owning my parts, unbothered by whoever needs to paint a picture of me that keeps their narrative alive. This unbothered state isn't about being cold, right? It's about the emotional sovereignty, I think, that comes when you stop outsourcing your self-worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. I'm also very grateful for the people I have in my circles now and the new friends who've come along and travel with me in alignment, kindness, caring, and that genuine spirit that, we all really want. Also, this unbothered bit, I wanted to share a quick story. I recently experienced a moment that tested every bit of growth I've written about in this book. I found myself in a situation where I had to address a blatant disregard for history and perceived shared values. A moment, I'd say, where someone's moral lacking was on full display. It was brought to my attention by somebody else, and I had a choice to make because it involved me indirectly but directly. My initial feeling was, that familiar surge of indignation, I guess, that visceral reaction that you get when you realize someone is trying to profit, either literally or emotionally, from something that should have been held sacred. I ended up reaching out to speak my truth, not to start a fire. I just wanted to hold up a mirror, if that makes sense. What came back was an absolute masterclass in manipulation. Before there was a single word of accountability or even a flicker of empathy for the position that this person had put me in, neither actually came, they immediately retreated into a performance of victimhood. They tried to weaponize their own pain to justify a total lack of integrity, kind of wrapping their choices in the trendy language of healing and self-care. I don't take healing and self-care lightly. I preach about it a lot and I wholly believe in it. So when people just kind of throw it around like that, really bugs me, especially when it's very obvious it was a desperate attempt to flip the script, right? To kind of make my boundary look like an attack and their supposed selfishness look like a spiritual necessity. In that moment, though, I could see the game being laid out. This person was baiting me to argue, to defend facts, or to prove that their frightening energy narrative was a lie that they'd invented to sleep better at night, I guess. They wanted an audience for their rehearsal of old wounds. But for me, the growth that I've gone through, it's taught me how to recognize a trap before I even set foot into it. And that's why I wanted to share this story. I realized I didn't need to win an argument with someone who is committed to their own delusion. So I opted out. I chose not to play. I didn't respond at all. I didn't engage with the performative trauma, and I didn't wait for a thank you for a gift that was never theirs to give in the first place. I walked away with my head high, leaving them to kind of live in a narrative they've built. I think that this is the ultimate act of reclaiming your life, right? Realizing, now that I've said all that you no longer have to participate in someone else's dysfunction just because they tried to invite you. Most importantly, in this particular situation, my mental health and my memory of someone special are worth more than a transaction with someone who treats his legacy in the way that this individual did. This person is stuck in a cycle of old friendships and old grudges, and I've moved on, and my piece in this decision is something I am proud of, because 10 years ago was a far different story. Anyway, moving on. This epilogue also emphasizes the role of the pandemic as a crucible. The forced isolation of those years became a space for reflection and for confronting long-held trauma and cultivating resilience. It framed the concept of quiet from punishment to preparation, a chance to learn how to protect your voice and preserve your peace and live authentically in this world that often demands compliance, as we all know, and the pandemic taught us that. We often view isolation as a void, but for a survivor, it can be a sanctuary where the static of the world kind of finally drops away, right? So that you can hear your own heartbeat again. This epilogue explores hope and choice and purpose. Healing does not erase pain or triggers. It teaches you how to respond to them, and choosing yourself and prioritizing your peace and trusting your instincts is the revolutionary act that transforms survival into a meaningful, fulfilling life, right? It's the shift from asking, why did this happen, to who am I now because I survived it? This final chapter reminds listeners that freedom, love, and authenticity are attainable even after profound trauma, and that the other side of quiet is rich with possibility. Trust me. Before I let you go today, I wanted to take a moment to speak from the heart, away from the script of the book. The response to this season and to this story has been more than I ever expected. And I want to say a massive, sincere thank you to everyone who's reached out. My inbox has been filled with the most incredible supportive messages, not just for me, but for Nate. He's received them too. They haven't come through me to him. He's getting them. For Brian and for my whole family, knowing that our journey has kind of resonated with you and that you're rooting for us, this means the world. It really does. And I want to touch on something really special that's been happening. So a few people have actually come forward recently to admit that they were once quite judgmental, maybe even jealous of my relationship with Nate. They've shared that their opinions were based from a place of ignorance or just not, having the full picture. And they've reached out to say that they finally understand now. I've alluded to this, in promos for the show for this season and everything, that a lot of people are starting to get it. One woman in particular told me that hearing this story didn't just change her mind about us, but it changed the way she plans to see and judge, and we shouldn't be judging people, see and judge people in the future. That is the power of sharing our stories, right? It replaces judgment with empathy, right? So to those of you who had the courage to admit that and share your growth with us, thank you. Like, honestly, Nate and I both appreciate that more than we could say. It's a reminder that while some people choose to stay stuck in their narratives, many others are willing to open their hearts and learn, and then even go a step further, put the ego aside, and tell us. And I think that you'll find you will be greeted with warmth, and that's it. Thank you for traveling this road with me, with us. I appreciate you listening to Unbound, Season 3, The Other Side of Quiet. The epilogue is not just a closing chapter. It's an invitation to claim your own peace, and I hope you do, and your own voice, and I hope you do, and your own story. If this story resonates with you, know that your healing is possible. You're worthy of love and authenticity and freedom and peace. Choose yourself. Protect your peace. Protect that peace. Season 4 will be coming soon. Thank you for listening to Unbound and the Other Side of Quiet.